Chapter 4. I see a square white house with a sandy road in front. People on horses are going back and forth. Catherine was speaking in her usual dreamy whisper. There are trees, a plantation, a big house with a bunch of smaller houses, like slave houses. It's very hot. It's in the South, Virginia. She thought the date was 1873. She was a child. There are horses and lots of crops, corn, tobacco. She and the other servants ate in a kitchen of the big house. She was black, and her name was Abby. She felt a foreboding, and her body tensed. The main house was on fire, and she watched it burn down. I progressed her 15 years in time to 1888. I'm wearing an old dress, cleaning a mirror on the second floor of a house, a brick house with windows, with lots of panes. The mirror is wavy, not straight, and it has knobs on the end. The man who owns the house is named James Manson. He has a funny coat with 3 buttons and a big black collar. He has a beard. Ellipsis. I don't recognize him as someone in Catherine's present lifetime. He treats me well. I live in a house on the property. I clean the rooms. There is a schoolhouse on the property, but I'm not allowed in the school. I make butter, too. Catherine was whispering slowly, using very simple terms and paying great attention to detail. Over the next 5 minutes, I learned how to make butter. Abby's knowledge of churning butter was new to Catherine, too. I moved her ahead in time. I am with somebody, but I don't think we are married. We sleep together, but we don't always live together. I feel okay about him, but nothing special. I don't see any children. There are apple trees and ducks. Other people are in the distance. I'm picking apples. Something is making my eyes itch. Catherine was grimacing with her eyes closed. It's the smoke. The wind is blowing it this way, the smoke from burning wood. They're burning up wooden barrels. She was coughing now. It happens a lot. They're making the inside of the barrels black, to waterproof. After the excitement of last week's session, I was eager to reach the in-between state again. We had already spent 90 minutes exploring her lifetime as a servant. I had learned about bedspreads, butter, and barrels. I was hungry for a more spiritual lesson. Forsaking my patience, I advanced her to her death. It's hard to breathe. My chest hurts so much. Catherine was gasping, in obvious pain. My heart hurts, it's beating fast. I'm so cold, my body's shaking. Catherine began to shiver. People are in the room, giving me leaves to drink, a tea. It smells funny. They're rubbing a liniment on my chest. Fever, but I feel very cold. She quietly died. Floating up to the ceiling, she could see her body in the bed, a small, shriveled woman in her 60s. She was just floating, waiting for someone to come and help her. She became aware of a light, feeling herself drawn toward it. The light was becoming brighter, and more luminous. We waited in silence as minutes slowly passed. Suddenly she was in another lifetime, thousands of years before Abby. Catherine was softly whispering, I see lots of garlic, hanging in an open room. I can smell it. It is believed to kill many evils in the blood and to cleanse the body, but you must take it every day. The garlic is outside too, on top of a garden. Other herbs are there, figs, dates, and other herbs. These plants help you. My mother is buying garlic and the other herbs. Somebody in the house is sick. These are strange roots. Sometimes you just keep them in your mouth, or ears, or other openings. You just keep them in. I see an old man with a beard. He's one of the healers in the village. He tells you what to do. There is some type of plague killing the people. They're not embalming because they're afraid of the disease. People are just buried. The people are unhappy about this. They feel the soul cannot pass on this way, contrary to Catherine's after-death reports. But so many have died. The cattle are dying, too. Water, floods, people are sick because of the floods. She apparently just realized this bit of epidemiology. I also have some disease from the water. It makes your stomach hurt. The disease is of the bowel and stomach. You lose so much water from the body. I'm by the water to bring more back, but that's what is killing us. I bring the water back. I see my mother and brothers. My father has already died. My brothers are very sick. I paused before progressing her in time. I was fascinated by the way her conceptions of death and the afterlife changed so much from lifetime to lifetime. And yet her experience of death itself was so uniform, so similar, every time. A conscious part of her would leave the body around the moment of death, floating above and then being drawn to a wonderful, energizing light. She would then wait for someone to come and help her. The soul automatically passed on. Embalming, burial rituals, or any other procedure after death had nothing to do with it. It was automatic, no preparation necessary, like walking through a just opened door. The land is barren and dry. Ellipsis. I see no mountains around here, just land, very flat and dry. One of my brothers has died. I'm feeling better, but the pain is still there. However, she did not live much longer. I'm lying on a pallet with some type of covering. She was very ill, and no amount of garlic or other herbs could prevent her death. Soon she was floating above her body, drawn to the familiar light. She waited patiently for someone to come to her. Her head began to roll slowly from side to side, as if she was scanning some scene. Her voice was again husky and loud. They tell me there are many gods, for God is in each of us. I recognized the voice from the in-between live state by its huskiness as well as by the decidedly spiritual tone of the message. What she said next left me breathless, pulling the air from my lungs. Your father is here, and your son, who is a small child. Your father says you will know him because his name is Avram, and your daughter is named after him. Also, his death was due to his heart. Your son's heart was also important, for it was backward, like a chicken's. He made a great sacrifice for you out of his love. His soul is very advanced. His death satisfied his parents' debts. Also he wanted to show you that medicine could only go so far, that its scope is very limited. Catherine stopped speaking, and I sat in an odd silence as my numbed mind tried to sort things out. The room felt icy cold. Catherine knew very little about my personal life. On my desk I had a baby picture of my daughter, grinning happily with her two bottom baby teeth in an otherwise empty mouth. My son's picture was next to it. Otherwise Catherine knew virtually nothing about my family or my personal history. I had been well schooled in traditional psychotherapeutic techniques. The therapist was supposed to be a tabula rasa, a blank tablet upon which the patient could project her own feelings, thoughts, and attitudes. These then could be analyzed by the therapist, enlarging the arena of the patient's mind. I had kept this therapeutic distance with Catherine. She really knew me only as a psychiatrist, nothing of my past or of my private life. I had never even displayed my diplomas in the office. The greatest tragedy in my life had been the unexpected death of our firstborn son, Adam, who was only 23 days old when he died, early in 1971. About 10 days after we had brought him home from the hospital, he had developed respiratory problems and projectile vomiting. The diagnosis was extremely difficult to make. Total anomalous pulmonary venous drainage with an atrial septal defect, we were told. It occurs once in approximately every 10 million births. The pulmonary veins, which were supposed to bring oxygenated blood back to the heart, were incorrectly routed, entering the heart on the wrong side. It was as if his heart were turned around, backward. Extremely, extremely rare. Heroic open heart surgery could not save Adam, who died several days later. We mourned for months, our hopes and dreams dashed. Our son, Jordan, was born a year later, a grateful balm for our wounds. At the time of Adam's death, I had been wavering about my earlier choice of psychiatry as a career. I was enjoying my internship in internal medicine, and I had been offered a residency position in medicine. After Adam's death, I firmly decided that I would make psychiatry my profession. I was angry that modern medicine, with all of its advanced skills and technology, could not save my son, the simple, tiny baby. My father had been in excellent health until he experienced a massive heart attack early in 1979, at the age of 61. He survived the initial attack, but his heart wall had been irretrievably damaged, and he died 3 days later. This was about 9 months before Catherine's first appointment. My father had been a religious man, more ritualistic than spiritual. His Hebrew name, Avram, suited him better than the English, Alvin. 4 months after his death, our daughter, Amy, was born, and she was named after him. Here, in 1982, in my quiet, darkened office, a deafening cascade of hidden, secret truths was pouring upon me. I was swimming in a spiritual sea, and I loved the water. My arms were gooseflesh. Catherine could not possibly know this information. There was no place even to look it up. My father's Hebrew name, that I had a son who died in infancy from a 1 in 10 million heart defect, my brooding about medicine, my father's death, and my daughter's naming, it was too much, too specific, too true. This unsophisticated laboratory technician was a conduit for transcendental knowledge. And if she could reveal these truths, what else was there? I needed to know more. Who? I sputtered. Who is there? Who tells you these things? The masters, she whispered, the master spirits tell me. They tell me I have lived 86 times in physical state. Catherine's breathing slowed, and her head stopped rolling from side to side. She was resting. I wanted to go on, but the implications of what she had said were distracting me. Did she really have 86 previous lifetimes? And what about the masters? Could it be? Could our lives be guided by spirits who have no physical bodies but who seem to possess great knowledge? Are there steps on the way to God? Was this real? I found it difficult to doubt, in view of what she had just revealed, yet I still struggled to believe. I was overcoming years of alternative programming. But in my head and my heart and my gut, I knew she was right. She was revealing truths. And what about my father and my son? In a sense, they were still alive, they had never really died. They were talking to me, years after their burials, and proving it by providing specific, very secret information. And since all that was true, was my son as advanced spiritually as Catherine had said? Did he indeed agree to be born to us and then die 23 days later in order to help us with our karmic debts and, in addition, to teach me about medicine and humankind, to nudge me back to psychiatry? I was very heartened by these thoughts. Beneath my chill, I felt a great love stirring, a strong feeling of oneness and connection with the heavens and the earth. I had missed my father and my son. It was good to hear from them again. My life would never be the same again. A hand had reached down and irreversibly altered the course of my life. All of my reading, which had been done with careful scrutiny and skeptical detachment, fell into place. Catherine's memories and messages were true. My intuitions about the accuracy of her experiences had been correct. I had the facts. I had the proof. Yet, even in that very instant of joy and understanding, even in that moment of the mystical experience, the old and familiar logical and doubting part of my mind lodged an objection. Perhaps it's just ESP or some psychic skill. Granted, it's quite a skill, but it doesn't prove reincarnation or master spirits. Yet this time I knew better. The thousands of cases recorded in the scientific literature, especially those of children speaking foreign languages to which they had never been exposed, of having birthmarks at the site of previous mortal wounds, of these same children knowing where treasured objects were hidden or buried thousands of miles away and decades or centuries earlier, all echoed Catherine's message. I knew Catherine's character and her mind. I knew what she was and what she wasn't. No, my mind could not fool me this time. The proof was too strong and too overwhelming. This was real. She would verify more and more as our sessions progressed. At times over the succeeding weeks I would forget the power and immediacy of this session. At times I would fall back into the route of everyday life, worrying about the usual things. Doubts would surface. It was as if my mind, when not focused, tended to drift back into the old patterns, beliefs, and skepticism. But then I would remind myself, this actually happened. I appreciated how difficult it is to believe these concepts without having personal experience. The experience is necessary to add emotional belief to intellectual understanding. But the impact of experience always fades to some degree. At first, I was not aware of why I was changing so much. I knew I was more calm and patient, and others were telling me how peaceful I looked, how I seemed more rested and happier. I felt more hope, more joy, more purpose, and more satisfaction in my life. It dawned on me that I was losing the fear of death. I wasn't afraid of my own death or of non-existence. I was less afraid of losing others, even though I would certainly miss them. How powerful the fear of death is. People go to such great lengths to avoid the fear. Midlife crises, affairs with younger people, cosmetic surgeries, exercise obsessions, accumulating material possessions, procreating to carry on a name, striving to be more and more youthful, and so on. We are frightfully concerned with our own deaths, sometimes so much so that we forget the real purpose of our lives. I was also becoming less obsessive. I didn't need to be in control all the time. Although I was trying to become less serious, this transformation was difficult for me. I still had much to learn. My mind was indeed now open to the possibility, even the probability, that Catherine's utterances were real. The incredible facts about my father and my son could not be obtained through the usual senses. Her knowledge and abilities certainly proved an outstanding psychic ability. It made sense to believe her, but I remained wary and skeptical about what I read in the popular literature. Who are these people reporting psychic phenomena, life after death, and other amazing paranormal events? Are they trained in the scientific method of observation and validation? Despite my overwhelming and wonderful experience with Catherine, I knew my naturally critical mind would continue to scrutinize every new fact, every piece of information. I would check to see if it fit into the framework being built with every session. I would examine it from every angle, with a scientist's microscope. And yet I could no longer deny that the framework was already there.